with it. Hello, and welcome to this meeting of the Task Force to Reimagine Policing in Brookline. This is our meeting for Friday, March 26th. I'm Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member and Chair of the Task Force. With me, as always, by our able, capable, highly competent, and very influential Task Force members, as well as town staff and liaisons that are here to help us in our work. So I wanted to get right to it. Our agenda for today is such. We've got just some minutes to approve. And then after that, we're going to have a discussion of the report and public hearing feedback. So this is a continued discussion of feedback from the meetings that have been ongoing, but in particular, a discussion, the feedback that came from Wednesday night's Committee on Policing Reforms, which is responding to some of our proposals and proposing some areas of common ground that we can discuss. And they took some votes on Wednesday night that we can talk about and look at, in particular, the Police Commission Advisory Council, which incorporates some elements of what we were talking about in our own oversight work. Then we've got an opportunity for any new business. Before we do any of that, wanted to open the floor for any announcements or updates from any of you. Gigi.
I have an announcement. As many of you probably know on this, but for the benefit of any viewers, there's going to be a vigil this afternoon, 4 o'clock, at the high school. And it'll be in honor of the victims of the shootings in Atlanta. And so you're all invited to attend, and we hope to have a good turnout. I also wanted to mention very quickly that last week's meeting, I had given the police department some grief for not making a statement and visiting Asian businesses. We received a text or a message to one of the BaFin steering committee members that they have since made visits to 30 businesses and houses of worship around there. And so just wanted to acknowledge when credit is due that they have done that.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Gigi. Anyone else? Right. I'll just note, as you all know, we were scheduled as a select board to start taking the first votes, and the understanding is there are going to be, multiple votes over a period of time based on the work of the task force and the committee, but scheduled to take the first votes as early as next Tuesday. We're going to be pushing that back a week to what I believe is Tuesday, April 3rd. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on the date. And the reason for that is me, essentially. As you all know, we've been on Baby Watch 2021, and she ain't here yet. And she was expected to be by now. That puts me in a position where either one of two things, either over the next few days, maybe she will come and I'll be unavailable to respond to late breaking changes and emails and members of the public who are inquiring about what's happening with this work. And in any event, I either won't be prepared for Tuesday night or won't be there on Tuesday night. So I've talked to Bernard Green, the chair of the select board, and we've agreed that it makes the most sense to actually push that all back a week so that, I wouldn't miss either any discussion or any votes, of course. So that's what we're doing. And I just wanted to make everyone here aware of that. Also gives us a little bit more time if we wanted to, depending on how our conversation goes today and to share our response to what's coming out of the reform committee and any changes we recommend to volley back if need be, and continue to work to find something that works for both parties that we can bring to the select board. So any questions about any of that before we go on? Okay. All right. With that said, we do have these minutes, and they look good to me. If these are the minutes from Friday, March 19th, this was our last meeting. Any last minute edits or questions about the minutes? All right, well, let's go ahead. Per usual, I'll just go across my screen. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from Friday, March 19th, 2021. Alexander?
Yes.
Almas?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Chi-Chi?
Yes.
Malcolm?
Yes.
Kristen?
Yes.
Aton?
Should I abstain? I wasn't there.
You should abstain, yes. And Bonnie?
Yes.
And I vote yes. All right, great. So next up, I was trying to think about how to work us through this, and apologies to members of the task force and for getting this information to you last night. Again, the meeting that we're responding to took place on Wednesday night, and it took some time to basically put what happened in that meeting into written form, and to make sure that was all incorporated into whether it be the PCAC proposal or the votes that you see, which start in the packet on page 11. So you'll see the PCAC proposal, just for your reference. And by the way, when I say page, I'm saying the page that's in the bottom right corner, not in the middle of the document, which may be different. So the PCAC in our packet starts on page 4. I want to go through that a little bit first, and then the votes that took place at the Wednesday night meeting of the Police Reform Committee start on page 11. Okay, and so I understand if folks haven't had a chance to take a look at that in detail. I'll work you through the PCAC document. That may give you some more time also to and thank you, Devin, for sharing the links there with panelists and attendees, and then have an opportunity we'll get into the votes. Alexander?
I've only been able to listen partway through to the Wednesday night meeting. It's not clear to me, based on the agenda and packet that we have here, looking at page 11, which votes passed that are listed here.
None
Right.
of them failed. So I believe they all passed.
Right, and if you continue to scroll down, you'll actually see the votes. So they start on page 14. So you'll see the votes of each member of the committee there. Yep.
Thank you. Missed that.
Yeah. You got it. No problem. Yes,
That's
Mom.
okay.
Yeah,
So
please.
I may, especially in the haze this morning, confuse what I read versus what I saw / listened to. They did. Am I right that they pushed the votes on Walk and Talk and SRO to the next meeting?
Yes, and that's an unusual meeting. It will happen on Monday
All right.
at 4 p.m.
Yeah, I just wanted.
Right.
It's a Friday morning. I wanted to be clear.
No, that's that makes total sense. Yeah, there were things where we had Bernard and I met. Well, we've talked multiple times, but really sat down to meet and work through some of these recommendations that you see on there, and we reached, I would say, substantial agreement. But I think there are a couple of areas where we're still off, and those areas I think we're just going to bring to the select board and figure it out there. But let me walk you all through it, and then I think some of this will become evident. And as questions come up, please raise them. So I wanted to start with the page 4 again of the packet. This is the Police Commissioners Advisory Committee proposal. Which I've said from the early days, it was a very good, I think, attempt at addressing some of the real issues that we have as police commissioners, as select board members, in providing oversight of the police department, which is something that folks expect of us, and rightfully so. Because of bandwidth issues and the ability to manage this with everything else, and if folks remember, select board members are not full-time doing this work. Some are retired and have other responsibilities. Some of us have full-time jobs, and so the ability to meet what the community expects of select board members just wasn't there, at least not in this realm. And so this body will help the board do that work. Now, of course, what we presented in our task force report was something with a bit more teeth than what you see here. was something that would have its own independent powers. This does not necessarily empower this oversight body with certain abilities that we might want to. And it is wholly advisory to the select board. It's up to the select board to take action. This body itself isn't in a position necessarily to take action. That said, there's a lot written into here that that gives this PCAC the ability to in many ways shadow, in many ways question, to be involved in policy decisions. Whether it's helping write policy or reviewing policy, those kinds of things. The first, and so please take a look at the document as a whole. One of the things I wanted to sort of just get your feedback on, and I'm not looking or hunting for criticism at this point. If you have some, we're certainly open to it. But what I say that to say, just because I'm highlighting something doesn't mean I'm leading you to say you should criticize this. But I think there are important elements in here, and I'll share the elements where I think I've got an issue, but that I want you to be able to take a look at. One is the membership. And under charge, that starts with the third paragraph, and it's the third, fourth, and essentially the fifth paragraph. There's more after that, but it's basically the bottom of page 4, those last 3 paragraphs. And it contemplates a 5-member committee, voting members committee. And they're all residents of Brookline with a breadth of lived and professional experience and expertise regarding policing and related issues. It does say at least one voting member shall have legal expertise if possible, and if possible, knowledge of public sector law. Voting members shall be appointed by the select board for staggered 3-year terms. The committee shall have a chair designated by the select board. Voting members must demonstrate an ability to make critical, independent, and fair judgments on the policies and practices of the department. Voting members shall neither be a current employee of the town nor an immediate family member of a current department employee. That's read to be police department. Membership shall have racial and economic diversity, including the perspectives of communities that have suffered from inequitable treatment by policing in America. And then it goes on to detail non-voting members. In addition to the voting members, there shall be 4 non-voting members from town staff. They are someone from the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, the Human Resources Department, Town Council, and the Police Department. And Diversity Office will be sort of the staffing body for this committee. And then a line, to ensure the committee is aware of the concerns and issues of employees who are not in management of the police department, the committee shall on a regular basis meet with rank and file officers, including representatives of the Brookline Police Union and other department employees. So I wanted to get first your feedback on this section to see if you have any feedback on that, if that's fine with you, if you'd like to see some changes made there. Let's get into it. Malcolm.
I have one comment and one question. As I was listening, I go through, I couldn't help but think of particularly like my work with the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Commission. Oftentimes when people apply and they don't get appointed, it just kind of goes into the ether and nobody knows why. I mean, there's been times we've had people who've tried to get appointed and we're clearly not, but we actually had vacancies on the commission. And so I would like some sort of public acknowledgement if somebody applies, like, you know, like we don't even get a vote. You know what I mean? Like it goes in executive. We don't even know like which select board members voted for that person to not be on that commission. And so I think there has to be something that is public. I don't think we have to like go through a horrific like detailed minutes of like the debate or deliberations over that person applying, but there has to be at least some public record. Like Malcolm Cawthorn applied. I mean, I know it would get on because I'm a town employee, which I think makes sense, but also like if that's the reason or whatever, at least have like something on record that, you know, it was 5-0
right,
or something. And that has to happen. I think the other thing that I'm curious about, and I just don't know, is it sort of normal in other citizen bodies like this to have either police officers? I know in listening to that meeting, there's a big push for the union president to be sort of or have a permanent liaison. Yeah, I'm curious about that because I have my own reservations, but I can also be persuaded if this is something that we've seen elsewhere that works well.
Yeah. So on the two things, one, I'm not sure what was happening before I joined the board, but when in the last year, I know actually when I joined the board, there was a severe backlog of applications for a number of boards, committees, and commissions, and I think that was due to some staffing changes that preceded Devin Fields joining us on staff. Since then, as far as I know, we take votes in public on applications to boards, committees, and commissions. We each vote, so that's all recorded in the minutes at this point. And I think everybody gets an up and down vote that applies. Most boards, some do. I'd say most boards don't have the kind of restriction where it says you can't be, some of the things you see here, like related to somebody from a certain department or anything. I think most boards don't have that. So that's not usually an issue. Devin, anything to add on that?
Sure. Yes, I was going to make the same point as Raul. There had been quite a bit of turnover in my position over the last 3 years. And so there was a huge backlog. And like you said, Malcolm, people were applying, they weren't getting responded to, appointment letters weren't going out, rejection letters weren't going out. So I've done a lot to sort of get that back up to where it is. And then another piece is that sometimes board and commission chairs will send their, feedback to the select board about, I think this person is worth an interview. They've come to a few of our meetings. I can tell that they're really engaged in the work. And other times they're like, I don't think this person is really ready yet. I'll speak to them offline. And so sometimes there's a little bit of that goes on, but I do try and capture most of those communications and put them in the packet when those boards and commissions are up on the agenda. But that was definitely a huge problem prior to that. But Raul's right. The votes are taken and each board member, the way that we've been running them lately, says who they would like to see. So if there is a contested position, they'll say, I'm looking for Kristen, Michael, and Chi-Chi to be appointed to this, which obviously then would leave out the other two candidates. So you can see who they aren't voting, but we were trying to move away from a place where the select board members would have to be like, no to this person, no to that person. So it's, framed in a more positive way.
Yeah, let me add one thing to that is because there's a caveat here is when starting a new body. And so this we do have to consider this with this body. When starting a new body, what we've been doing is because for instance, for the task force, I know we got 100 applications and I know a number of people applied for both the task force and the reform committee, and some people applied for just one or the other. We got 100 applications. It would not have been a good use of board time to interview 100 people. I don't know how long that would have taken us, but it would have been many weeks of full meetings just doing that. I don't know how many applications we get for something like this. I don't know if it's 10 or if it's 300. I frankly don't know. But if it's 10, board members might be inclined to interview every person that applies. If it's 300, clearly we're not going to be able to do that. And so in those cases, we've been having a pair of board members essentially put together a slate and say, look, we've looked at all the applications. Here are the folks that we think, would make sense. And of course, other board members can disagree with the names that end up on there. And we have a public discussion about all that. So I just want to be clear about the distinction here. It might be different than what I just described earlier. The other piece, Malcolm, what you said, I do think this is important because it's not reading this. It's not totally clear that the representative that we're looking for from the police department is someone in sort of the upper ranks, because one of the biggest things that this body would do is actually look at policies in particular. And I think if it's not the chief that's representing the police department on here, it should be a superintendent or deputy superintendent. And maybe that's something that we can be more clear about. I mean, someone could, according to the reading of this, just designate an officer or sergeant or just someone in the department from the rank and file And what we're looking here is someone that has a deeper knowledge of the policies and practices of the department from a management perspective. So,
well, I think I'm trying to sort of make headway. Is having a police presence something that's proposed through the reform committee, something that Brookline wants, or is this sort of normal? There's a lot of other places that do have civilian committees that do this stuff, and I'm just not aware if it is, for lack of a better term, normal to have a police person on that is a liaison with such committees and attends meetings and other things. And so, I'm just trying to figure that out. I mean, I think my instinct is to worry about that influence, but I also can be persuaded the other way that if this is what normally happens and it's typically a good thing, I can hear that. I just don't know that. And so my instinct is I'm worried about the influence of things, as well as, I've been pretty open that I felt like at times there's been misinformation coming from police. And so, I do worry, but again, I can be persuaded.
Okay. Thanks, Malcolm. Alexander?
I'm also worried about having a police officer on the committee attending every meeting as a non-voting member. I think the idea of regularly meeting with rank and file in order to get their perspective on what's going on in the department is not a bad idea. I worry about having somebody on there. I worry about it for a number of reasons. First of all, this body is supposed to be taking, or at least reviewing, complaints from people in Brookline. There's already a complaint system through the police that people don't use. Isn't part of our whole thought process here that, folks who aren't comfortable reporting to the police come and report to a civilian body? Mm-hmm. And I worry that having a member of the police regularly on that body would discourage people from feeling comfortable enough to actually issue those recommendations. Second of all, I'm just worried as a matter of definitional, just as first principles. You have this body that's set up to provide oversight to a second body, which is the police. And we want to have a member of the second body on the oversight body. I'm not familiar with setting up organizations like this. Maybe that's standard operating practice and it exists for very good reasons. And I'm like Malcolm, I would love to hear more about that. But I'm a little concerned from that perspective.
Thanks, Alexander. Mike?
I feel really just the opposite. I don't see how you can have a body of this sort a committee of this sort that doesn't have a liaison to the police department. In terms of what's typical practice in almost in every sort of special committee that I've seen set up in Brookline and elsewhere, if you look at what happens at the state level, there is a non-voting liaison to the organizations that the committee is involved with, and the purpose of having somebody there is as much to explain to the committee members as it is for anything else. The meetings of this commission are presumably going to be public, and it's just difficult for me to envision how it can work without having a direct some kind of direct input from a member of the police department. I do think Raul's correct in saying that if there is a representative from the police department, it should be somebody in the command structure.
Thanks, Mike. Chi-Chi?
Yeah, sort of following along Mike's comments. I mean, I assume you would want someone from the police department there, just in terms of information and liaisoning. it may be a matter of semantics. Would this person be officially a member of the committee, albeit non-voting? Or, I mean, if you think about it, school committee, select board, you have town employees there. You have Mel there, you have the superintendent there, but they're obviously not voting. And maybe the most critical thing is when you go into executive session, they're not there. So I think the important thing is the ability of this committee to go into executive session without the police liaison or, you know, any of the other town employees there.
Thanks, Chi-Chi. Kristen?
Yeah, I think that we may be in a position where we have to look at something similar to what we found with SRO, which is it should not be dependent on the person. If the person that participates does so in an effective way, it could be construed as, well, this person is doing a good job. If the person who participates thwarts the efforts of the committee or oversight committee, then we end up with a structural problem that we may have a hard time trying to undo. And so I wouldn't want us to end up replicating what we currently see right now, which is it can't be dependent on having picked the right person and then hoping that that person stays in that role for a continued period of time. I think Chi-Chi's points are particularly compelling ones, but I'm just struck by our potentially replicating something that we found problematic.
Right. Thank you. I think for starters, something that I heard in one of your comments that I think we can and should change is not, first of all, not calling them members at all, just calling them liaisons from town staff. So they don't need to be called non-voting members. There's a 5-member committee and that's it. And so I'll recommend that they be changed to liaisons from non-voting members. Yeah, I think I can imagine there being moments when this committee is meeting and they're going to want to know, I mean, they're going to, you know, most meetings, I would imagine they're going to want somebody from the police department there to be able to answer questions about police policies and practices and procedures. I do want to mention, as far as the complaints go, that, and I don't see, I just did a quick search and there was something previously in here about executive session, but the idea around complaints is that if there are any, that those could be heard and discussed in executive session. But I don't see that in here right now, so I can't exactly say how that, maybe that's something that either got taken out for a reason or just didn't make it into a new draft. But there's something there too in those executive sessions, at least in our conversations, no member of the police department would be there. And so just know that.
Just to clarify, I think it's about executive session with the select board and dealing with civilian complaints. And I think you'd want more than just executive session for complaints.
Right. Well, there's only certain reasons that you can go into executive session. So there's a lot more things that I'm sure the select board, for instance, will want to go to executive session for, but we can't. And no, I'm literally talking about this committee going into executive session. That was a conversation that I had with Bernard and Michael Zurab, who were drafting this. So I'll circle back and figure out where that went. But I just did a quick search and there doesn't seem to be any mention of executive session of the committee anymore. So I'm gonna have to check that out. All right. Any other thoughts on this in terms of the makeup of the committee itself? It is just 5 residents. I think, so there are 2 things here. One, it's a kind of like it's not quite a shrug, but I don't know. It's the one where 1 voting member shall have legal expertise. Remember, I think it's unnecessary. The town council is there. I imagine town council has legal expertise and can let us know, give us opinions on public sector labor law. So I'd like to have that stricken. I just don't see how it's necessary that a commit of 5 that, you know, 1 seat be reserved for somebody with a lawyer. I think this is, you know, this is one of those things where when you have lawyers drafting a document, they write themselves into it. Sorry, Alexander. But that's just the thought on that. Let me hear from, so I'm looking, Mike first.
Yeah, I really, I disagree with you on that completely. I think you want somebody to balance town council, and an attorney who has knowledge of the law can provide that balance. I have, you know, take a great deal of advice from town council on warrant articles, and I find that it's very thoughtful, but just the same, I think in this kind of a situation, you'd want someone to have more of a civil liberties, civil rights background sitting on the committee.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's see. We've got a couple folks in the legal world right now. Alexander and Chichi both with hands up. Alexander, what say you?
Mike, I hadn't thought of that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I wonder, I mean, even from that perspective, I wonder if we could sort of try to get, and this doesn't necessarily have to be built into the founding document, but I wonder if we could try to get a liaison or somebody who could come to consult at half the meetings or something like, from the Massachusetts ACLU, from local projects that are similar, or even from, I know there's not a lot. So depending on the type of civil rights law you're talking about, if you're thinking specifically about law involved in suing the police, there's not a lot of people who practice that because it is very, very difficult to win those cases because the Supreme Court has set us up such that it's almost impossible. But there is one of those firms in Boston, and they might be willing to devote a little time to come and consult with us. Otherwise, I was going to agree with Raul. As if you've got the town council there, I don't see the reason to reserve an additional seat for a lawyer, particularly, I mean, you know, given the demographics of my profession and the ways that it tends to, you know, in some ways it's selecting by class. Not all the time, but a good percentage of the time.
Chichi?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. Alexander and I are both the legal professionals on this committee, and we agree. If you just have like a random lawyer, I mean, I practice consumer law. That brings very little to this task force. I think you might have forgotten I was a lawyer at one point. I mean, you know, Alexander's right. There's not that many folks who practice specifically on police complaints. There are, you know, maybe more with, you know, like a public defense background. I would say the more important thing is not having a lawyer, but having someone from the community that's impacted by policing and having, you know, frankly, a Black or brown resident.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in other cases, we're expected, for instance, to consider racial and economic diversity, that there shall be, but it's something we just need to consider in the applications. But this is the only place where it says there must be, you know, I mean, in a very specific, I don't know. That's just one area where maybe we'll talk about it more as a select board. Alexander?
I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot just for this particular piece.
Yeah.
I do think that having, like, putting an effort in there to get an additional a liaison for somebody, and this is not a bad idea. I agree that there's no need to have it in the committee. It occurs to me, if you can't get somebody who focuses on civil rights law and suing the police, having a criminal defense attorney is going to get you pretty far. A lot of what civil rights police suing attorneys, there's a better way to say that, a lot of their expertise includes criminal legal defense. And the reason I say this in particular is that there's a lot of things that police do that, an ordinary, rational human being looks at that and goes, that seems fine, or that seems like it's not fine. That a criminal defense attorney will be able to look at it, figure out, but pull out particular things that should be paid attention to that maybe the police liaison presence might not be willing to point out.
All right, Mike, and I want to wrap up this part of the conversation now.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that somebody who does criminal defense, perhaps has had some experience in the public defender's office, would know a great deal about police procedure and about I have to use the term about the situations where the police have abused procedure in order to sort of where the ends justify the means kind of logic. I have a daughter who's a public defender, and she has some very interesting stories. And so I think somebody like that would be, and she lives in Newton, so she's definitely not a candidate. I think that would be a very useful sort of liaison to have on the, member to have on the committee. I'll also say that there are other committees, the zoning board of appeals, for example, and I believe the planning board as well, are both by bylaw required to have members of certain professions on their committees.
Right, certainly not unheard of. Yeah, I just wonder on a 5-member board like this whether or not that's something that's absolutely necessary. I don't think so. I think it might be desirable, and even select board in looking at a bunch of candidates might want to include someone with a legal background among the mix, but having it be a requirement, I think, is maybe a step above. All right, we'll take a look at it. All right, there's a lot more in here. I do want to point out, and by the way, you're welcome, between now and the next time we meet, to provide any sort of, looking at the document. Send me a copy of this document with your little marginalia, or or any edits or suggestions or anything like that. I know there's a ton here, and if there's anything in particular that stands out to you right now, I'm happy to try to respond to it. One area where I will say there's the big issue with the complaint process. And by the way, there's a separate document that's being updated, which is I think the police complaint policy, but I don't know that the reform committee has finalized their updates on that document. But it's addressed in this document, so it's as according to the complaint policy, but that document's not finalized. But one huge area, to me, it's the whole ball game as it relates to police complaints is who's doing the investigating. This document does not contemplate any change to the Office of Professional Responsibility leading investigations about complaints related to police. Why is that an issue? Well, as I've said before, unlike larger cities that have, an IA is downtown, you go downtown and go see IA or whatever, and you have multiple precincts, and you may have never even encountered the person who works in internal affairs. This is very different. We have a relatively small department with folks who know each other very well, are in many cases related to each other or went to school with it is just, and this is not to say anything about the integrity of whoever holds this position. As we've said before, it's not about the person, it's about the system. It is ripe for abuse. If someone wanted to incorporate bias into this process, they certainly could, as it's written. And I suppose you could say that about any process, but there's an opportunity here for us to change this, and this document does nothing about that. What I think the position is that in order to remove the if people even agree with this, but to remove the responsibility of investigations from the OPR, the Office of Professional Responsibility, that would need to be bargained with the police union. And so what I'd like to get a commitment from the select board, if we're going to go in this direction right now with this document, understanding that we want to try to get this body up and running and move it forward, and that other changes might take a longer amount of time, is to get a commitment from the select board to bargain removing the investigatory role from the police department and placing it elsewhere. That could be in the HR department and making sure that they have the skills and ability to do that. That could be independent investigators, although I know that that's something that could be costly, or that could be granting power to this new body to conduct those investigations. And I know that there would be training necessary to make sure that the members of the committee would be able to do that. So in any event, for members of the public to have faith that the complaint that they're filing is being given a fair shake, I don't see any other way to make that possible other than removing the investigatory process from the police department itself. And so I wanted to highlight that. If you have any thoughts on that you'd like to share, I'm open to hearing them.
Does it talk about the investigation anywhere in this document, or is it just not in there at all?
Yeah, it's a bit. I think really what the presumption is that the OPR would follow their usual policy, the usual process. The complaints document gets, again, it's being updated, gets a little bit more into the ways that people can file complaints and the ways that they're handled. So that's all in those documents and not in this document. What the sort of the novel idea here is that the liaison, the person from the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Community Relations, can sit in with the investigator from the police department, but only when interviewing the complainant, the person that's filing the complaint, not when they're interviewing the officer. And so I just want to make sure that distinction is clear, but they would be able to be there, and then they could then relay in executive session, could relay what they're seeing as part of the investigation from their limited view, of course, with the committee. By the way, it provides here if the liaison from the diversity office is not able to do that, either because they just don't have the bandwidth to do it at all, or they're not able to do that for a specific complaint, that a member of the PCAC, a regular voting member of the PCAC, could then be the person that sits in on that part of the investigation. Provided, however, though, if they play that role, and essentially they also are a liaison to the person filing the complaint. So they're giving them information, they're checking in, they're making sure all their needs are being met, all those kinds of things. If they play that role, they cannot later vote on any matters related to that particular complaint. Is that clear? Yeah, basically, yeah, okay. I think that's clear. Good. Alexander.
Maybe if you're saying that this is in a different document, then I'm happy to just table this for another time. I'd love to see more information about what kinds of documents the PCAC is entitled to demand and receive from the department. I think that is something that's really important, because I don't want to see a situation where we set up the PCAC and then they don't receive the information they need in order to conduct their own review of the evidence available. I'm seeing some language about that in this document.
Right. Okay. That makes sense to me. Yeah. And I would say, just as a select board, I can't imagine us voting on this document without also having been able to review and potentially voting at the same time on the complaint document. They're so interconnected at this point. I don't know how we can vote on one and not the other. So yeah. Well, I think this is getting very close to being like ready to go. I don't know that it's ready to go unless we've seen the complaint document, and I don't think that's happened yet. I had Bonnie.
This might be a super basic question that maybe I just missed, but what is the difference between reviewing a complaint and investigating a complaint?
And where do you see that language? I just want to make sure I'm
Well, so if this body isn't investigating, what are they doing?
Right. In this case, what they're doing is they're reviewing the investigation.
So the investigation has happened and they're receiving that information.
Yeah. And so they may also receive complaints, but need to share those complaints forthwith with both the OPR, and this is in section, this is on the top of page 6, again, bottom right pagination, top of page 6, item 6, number I, the very first one. Receive complaints, so they can, let me see, let's start from the beginning. The committee and a designated employee, the liaison of the diversity office, shall play an active and ongoing role in monitoring and providing input into civilian and other complaint cases, including without limitation, the following responsibilities. The first one is to receive complaints directly from members of the public, either via an email address monitored by the liaison or in person at the diversity office, and properly transmit them to the police department's Office of Professional Responsibility and Select Board, along with, excuse me, any observations or recommendations on issues, including but not limited to the class designation of the complaint in accordance with the complaint procedure. And then it goes on and on and on. Go ahead.
So, excuse me. So in that circumstance, it's possible that they receive a complaint and then that complaint goes behind doors and then comes back out with the results of an investigation that they then look at, hopefully receiving information, all the information that was investigated. Like I'm watching, like there's an oversight, but can they really see? Like maybe that's exactly what you're talking about.
I think it's not altogether clear to me. Yeah, and maybe it's not altogether clear to me exactly what they can see or can't see in here. Right. And I imagine some of that might be being discussed in the other document that we don't have access to right now, but I'm not sure.
I mean, because that's ripe for what's the word? Ripe, it's problematic at the very least. So I'm trying to wrap my head around what that looks like in practice. Like ideally, what does that look like in practice when they can't do the investigation themselves? Like, can they, if they receive something and it looks like if they receive an investigation, how do they know that it's not a good investigation if it just came from the police department? Like, how would they be able to call bullshit if they're not in the investigation?
Yeah.
And it's very possible I'm just not grasping something. I'm just trying to make it really clear because I mean, if you don't get to be a part of like how the information is accessed and assessed, how can you oversee anything? Right?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. And I'm not in a position to answer it right now, unfortunately. But I've written it down and I'm going to see if I can get an answer. It might be helpful to check in with Michael Zurab, who is one of the primary drafters of the document, to see if, to get his take on whether or not he feels like that's covered in here or in the complaint document somewhere. So let me get into it. Hey, Tom?
Yeah, this is a bit responsive to Bonnie's point. I think there are essentially two goals that this could serve in general. One is an organization, a committee that has a lot of independent investigatory and oversight power. And there are benefits to that, but there are also interesting drawbacks. The main drawback is it takes responsibility away from the select board as elected officers. The alternative, which is very interesting to me, which is the direction it seems to be going, is to create a committee that has the ability to raise alarm, but doesn't have any responsibility independent of the select board. Which, if I was on the select board, I don't know if it's very interesting. It keeps attention on issues of policing in ways that wouldn't happen in the absence of this committee, but keeps all that attention on the select board and its ability to engage in oversight. And so I would just point out that I think there are some benefits to the public of the select board always being having their feet to their fire on these issues, because they are not deferring to any kind of independent agency. And so I mean, if I was on the select board, I don't know if I would want to go with this sort of less powerful independent committee, because it just means that the attention is going to remain focused on the select board, and the public should, in that case, hold the select board continually accountable for all of these things. The trade-off is the select board could deflect some of that attention by creating a stronger oversight board, which again, I think has benefits and drawbacks. But I just curious to me that I don't know if anyone's kind of named that trade-off, but I find it useful to think about, because I actually think there are benefits of having all of the attention and responsibility remain on the select board. I think there are benefits to that. There are clearly drawbacks as well. But I think when the select board is deciding this, I'm not sure how they, how you all will make that decision. Which is all to say, a committee like this that has, again, the power to raise alarm, but not much else, has benefits and drawbacks for the community, in my opinion.
Thanks, Eitan. Xander.
I think your point is well taken, Eitan. And I think it's also the case that as of right now, as far as I can tell, and I'm very much the baby here in so many ways, especially in terms of knowledge of town politics. As of right now, the select board just isn't doing it. And so I think part of this is, you know what? Select board's not doing the work. So we're going to make sure that this work gets done. And then we're going to push the select board about it.
Okay. All right. I think I'm trying to see if there's anything else I had in here. Excuse me. No, I think that's it for me for this document. I will say that this is a much improved document than the first time I saw it. So there's a lot of changes in here that that happened, so through conversations with Bernard and Mike and in the drafting process. And so I think a lot of the language here is much improved than when I first saw it. I think it is potentially set up to produce a better outcome. But I do think some of what the questions that Bonnie's asking are really important questions about, well, like if we take a step back and we say, how would this body possibly know if this is a good investigation or a bad investigation? I don't exactly know the answer to that, but I may not be in the best position to answer that right now. And so I think this is one I'm going to I'll share with Bernard, and I said, can you all figure out how to make that, point to me in the document where we're going to be able to know that this body is in a position to provide that kind of feedback to the select board, to say, look, we followed along, we were involved in the process, although we didn't, ask anyone any questions or anything, but we were involved in the process, and we think they missed some things. The other piece I want to bring up too is, and I don't know if this is addressed in the policy, but I've I don't remember if it was one of the experts that the committee brought in that brought this up, but it's been something that was stuck in the back of my mind, and I want to make sure this isn't a flaw in our process, is that that in certain cases anyway, when someone files a complaint about one thing, the investigation is about that one thing. But during the conversation that the investigator is having with the complainant, other issues may arise. But in certain processes, those issues are not addressed because the complainant didn't actually bring a formal complaint about those issues, right? And so someone may complain about, I don't know, any number of things, some violation of their rights by a police officer, but the officer also did this other thing that they mention as an aside, and that doesn't end up getting adjudicated through this not adjudicated, it's not the right word, but addressed through this process. And so I would just want to make sure that that's not something that's happening in our complaint process. That if someone comes in with one complaint, but it turns out they actually have three, that all three get addressed, not just the one. I don't know that that's not the case currently, but it's just something that was stuck in my mind. I want to make sure that that happens too. All right, let's get a couple more comments on this, and a reminder that we have our second document to look at and talk about as well. So I have first Anne.
I have a really quick question. The folks who put this together were you and Bernard and Michael, right? And I'm just wondering, how did Michael get involved in that triad? Was there any room for anybody else from the task force to be involved in the negotiation? Or?
Yeah, Michael is the subcommittee chair that was involved in drafting that piece, and so that's why he was there. Eitan, as the subcommittee chair of the departmental analysis subcommittee, was supposed to have been there with us, but Eitan was under the weather and not able to make it.
Okay,
So
I just wanted some clarity on that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Malcolm.
Thanks. Mine is a little more broad and general. I will hope the select board will, because this actually seems like something that is going to happen. Like this seems like this is something both the task force and the reform committee are dedicated to do. But I think, while I understand crafting by law and things have to be in legal form, I think what we really need are the select board to actually define what powers they want to be instilled in this committee, and to say that in real plain English, because what happens often is people will look at things later and formulate their own opinions of what that language actually means, right? And we see this, throughout history all the time. However, if the select board can say, this is what we specifically want this board to do, and then that can be debated, and then that can also direct the drafting of this committee, I think that would be really important. And then to stand on it, because I think, again, what will happen is, and I understand this is somewhat natural process. I do, like there's what's written there, and I used to teach the Supreme Court interprets what the law means, right? And I did all kinds of lessons on this. And so I do understand that, but I think the select board could also say in front of what they intend it to mean. So then when legal challenges or even outside challenges come in and sort of fine tooth comb go through the bylaw and say, well, you're saying this, or you really mean this, the select board can say no. And the reality is we don't have a judiciary in our town government. So ultimately the select board is determining what that interpretation is through other guidance, but they ultimately decide it. And so I think that would actually be really helpful, because I think what we're doing now is we're looking into this legalese through the weeds,
right?
Trying to figure out what the actual outcomes for the complaint process, the citizens committee will be. And we could actually just say it. And I get it. We're afraid to say it because once you say it, then you're held to that. But I think for this, with this new body, that's actually a paramount thing. These are the things we're saying they have the ability to do. Here's where it is in the bylaw. And then people can hash out or do whatever. But I think that would be really important, because it does, it comes back, things that have been very clear to me on other things about what we can and can't do, then show up with people who are going through and deciding and deciphering and splicing and dissecting the bylaw to say you can't do it, or that's not really their goal. And so I think that has to be set out front.
That makes sense to me. Got it. Yeah, I think you're right. I think folks shouldn't have to read the whole document and then divine what the powers of this body are. That it should be made explicit and to say, here's how those powers will be operationalized in these ways under section 6 item I or whatever it is. But to have that as part of the sort of the lead into the document itself. Okay. All right, this is helpful. As I said, if they're on the PCAC, if there are other, and by the way, specific language things you'd like to see changed. So it's always, I'm going to try to figure out how to put the feedback that we got today into language. But if you see, under item 6.7, something that you think should be written differently, then please let me know. Just, I don't know what the right way to do that is send it over or share it with Devin. Maybe that's the right way to do it. But let us know somehow so that I can provide that feedback to, at this stage, the reform committee, but later on the select board. And know that not every bit of feedback we're going to have is going to be incorporated at this stage. And by the way, as I was watching the reform committee meeting on Wednesday, and I hope it's clear to all of us. I think it's clear to all of us on the task force, and I hope it's clear to all the members of the reform committee is we are advisory to the select board. I think we know that because we've got a lot of really great recommendations that we're still not exactly sure the select board is taking as seriously as we'd like to. I think the reform committee maybe just got a taste of that, and we're all advisory to the select board. The select board can take any part of this and change it. Right. And so just know that that's all part of this. So it's important for us to put our, exactly what we want down on paper, but also not operate under the illusion that just because we put it down, that it's going to end up in there. Right. And the committee on reform should also not be under any of those illusions. OK, so the next piece starts on page 11. And this is, these are some areas of proposed common ground. This is also, again, Bernard and I sort of working in the background to try to figure out where we might have some common ground. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything that's in here, and certainly not the way that everything in here is framed. But in any event, here's what you have. And so let's take them just one by one. Basically one is the big piece. That's the piece where we've had a lot more conversations on. Other recommendations is different, but we can take a look at that too if you like. But number one, first to vote to establish the PCAC, including the diversity liaison. And that's what we just saw. It is, I think, based on the feedback that I got today, still got a little bit of a way to go, that there's still some opportunity to clarify exactly what powers the body has, and to improve upon some of the language that's in there. So we'll I'll share that, as I said, I'll share that feedback with Bernard to share with the committee. And if we get to that point in 2 Tuesdays from now where what we've shared hasn't been incorporated or addressed, then we'll share it with the select board. We'll figure that out. Item B was to vote to engage the CAHOOTS program in a consulting agreement that would include in its scope of consultation services. Actually, Devin, was this the final language that was voted on? It seems different to me.
That was what I still have an outstanding email looking for clarification. I plan to rewatch that meeting this weekend as I finish those meeting minutes, and we'll probably have a clearer idea. But that went into a little bit of a back and forth that was difficult to follow. Yeah,
I agree. There were a few of us in that meeting, and I think we all agree. Essentially, the idea here is to engage in a consultancy. We think CAHOOTS, I think at least one member of the Committee on Reforms wanted to leave it open for the possibility that it could be consulting with somebody that's not CAHOOTS. I think this is where we need to stand a little bit more firm and say, no, we think this is the right body to consult with based on the work that they've done. And this is our recommendation. We didn't recommend to consult with just somebody or some organization, but specifically this one, and it's for a reason. But anyway, to really figure out before we even do that what the scope of consultation services would be, and exactly, which of course makes sense. You want to do that. You want to figure out exactly what you want to ask someone to do before you ask them to do it. Otherwise, you end up burning money figuring out what you want them to do after you've engaged them in a consultancy, instead of having that figured out beforehand. So that totally makes sense. Anne, you want to say something about that? I know you were in that meeting.
I can wait if you want to
No,
continue.
please go ahead.
Intro.
No, please go ahead.
I don't think we need an RFP because that's a request for proposals from one or more organizations, which was recommended by the Reform Committee. There was a lot of talk about RFPs. Again, as you just said before, our task force recommendations are recommendations, and the select board can change them at will. But as you also just said, I mean, we were recommending the Cahoots program for a particular reason or reasons, and having a request for proposals from different organizations outside of Cahoots seems not useful at this point. So that's one piece. And I'm not sure what Elizabeth Child's to prepare chart for select board based on current chart means. I'm assuming that's reworking the chart that you created, Raul, in terms of the new department, perhaps.
Yeah.
I'm not clear as to what that means, and I wanted to find out more about that.
All right, Mel, in a second, I'm going to ask you a question about RFPs. But Devin, in the meantime, is that in the right place? Is that really related to item C, or is that the Elizabeth Child to prepare chart for select board based on current chart?
So I believe that is in reference to an organizational chart that the Reforms Committee created that serves as a counter to Brookline Forward.
Okay, so I think that's
just maybe in the wrong spot in this document.
Yeah, I think it belongs in item C. Yeah, I think that's what that is. Mel, I know it's only been since Wednesday night when this came up, but so you might not have an answer yet. But in the event that you do we know if the type of consultation that we have proposed engaging in with Cahoots requires a competitive bidding process at that level?
I need to know more about the scope of the contract and the amount of the contract, because there's a state law that we follow for procurement of all goods and services in local government, and they have certain thresholds, and depending on the threshold or the nature of the service, it depends a lot. But the amount of money that I was hearing, I'm not sure it would require an RFP, but it would require some competitive process, I believe. There are only a few things that are exempt from public procurement law, and other people have good lobbying efforts, like lawyers and architects and engineers, but most consultant contracts are required to be procured competitively at some level. There also are ways to, they refer to them as sole source contracts. If there's something so unique about the vendor that makes sense that they're the only one who could do this work, then there is a way to do that. But no, I didn't get into the details, Raul. But if the town is very interested in Cahoots because of the nature of their experience and work, there are ways to make sure the RFP reflects that and gives weight to not necessarily that company, but to companies who have that, and that does narrow things a lot. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. I'll get more details on it.
Okay. Yeah, I was just about to ask you if that's something that we need to try to figure out before the April 3rd meeting. No, okay. All right. Great. Almas? Thanks, Mel.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to actually just add on, and Mel already answered the question, because I know I heard some of that during that Wednesday meeting, and I listened to it, and I guess Mel answered that question. But the other thing also, from what I remember, like besides the language that I seem to remember that came up, cahoots or some other whatever, there was something like that. But there was also something about like as long as they look at the current like programs that exist in Brookline or something. There was some other language like that that I seem to remember. So I guess when we have that full language, we could look at that.
Right. And of course that makes sense. I mean, you want to, if you're looking to figure out whether or not it makes sense to integrate a new program into our approach, then you want to also make sure that you're clear on exactly what our current approach is and what's currently available to us. And so all of that makes sense to me. When, that part of the conversation, I totally agreed with.
And the other thing too is like, I know they talked a lot about BEST and the Massachusetts Behavioral Health Initiative, but again, like BEST is like very focused on emergency and hospitalism. So, I mean, I just, when that was brought up, I think that my comment would have been, well, that program doesn't focus on like pre-crisis and, it's much more emergency oriented, taking people to hospitals. I see Anne nodding. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, there was also, I just want to add too, there was one piece there where it seemed that the framing of cahoots was around it primarily, or maybe almost only being to address, supporting people who are unhoused.
Mhm.
And that's not at all like a proper framing of the cahoots model. And I was really confused by that framing, and maybe someone that's been doing some research on it was just doing, just not really looking into it properly. I don't know.
I think they were just looking at Eugene. They were only looking at the Eugene program.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm. And when you look at the definite, like when you look up cahoots, it says it's a crisis intervention model. It's like, it doesn't say, oh, we focus on homelessness. Like it's, but that the whole conversation was slanted towards it being unhoused people at that Wednesday night meeting. So
Thank you, Almas. Alexander.
Just two things. First of all, I'm kicking myself on the procurement law issue because I should have known to look this up while we were investigating things with cahoots. I think I would really love to hear what you find on that, Mel, so that we can, I think that will be necessary for us to respond to the reform committee on the RFP issue.
Yeah, I just actually just based, quick on your link, I quickly looked at it, and my recollection was right. It's $50,000 of a contract of value of $50,000 or more does require that formal RFP process, which isn't a terrible process. And as I said, you can create the criteria, that helps you focus on the type of vendor you're looking for, but it's not required for contracts less than 50,000, although contracts over 10,000 does require you to at least seek 3 quotes for the services if they're available.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wouldn't stress too much about this process. Thank you,
Malcolm.
Oh,
sorry, Alexander. Go ahead.
I was going to comment on the other things about cahoots really quick.
Yeah.
I really want to urge the reform committee in their discussions of cahoots to read our report and recommendation, which is an extensive discussion of cahoots, what it is, and what we are exactly asking to be done about cahoots. There was a lot of conversation that was like, well, cahoots is designed for big towns and cities, and they don't understand or know about what we have in Massachusetts, and they don't understand or know about our financial limitations. And if you listen to our conversation with Tim Black, or if you read our recommendations, I think we made it pretty clear that the point of this consultation is for them to design a cahoots-ish or whatever program that would work for Brookline, given the constraints and needs that we in particular have. That is the nature of the consultation process. The consultation process isn't, oh, gee, cahoots, can you tell us how to set it up exactly like you've got it? The consultation process is cahoots custom designing for us a program that would work best for our town, given the resources and the limitations and the needs that we have.
Right. Thanks, Alexander. Malcolm?
Anne, were you going to say something directly to what Alexander said?
I was going to say with us,
Mhm.
It's not something that Cahoots is just going to do on their own, but it's going to be
Yes.
a collaborative
Mhm.
process with us in terms of what works for Brookline.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and that's what I wanted. I mean, I think this is actually really dangerous. I think we've been really upfront in saying we're asking for the consultation from Cahoots to help us examine Brookline and fulfill what we need as a community. Not to bring in this Cahoots from Eugene, Oregon and place it in Brookline, not to have them dictate to us what we do, but to consult with us, because of course we're different. And of course we already have things. And so, you know, they're going to help consult with us in terms of like, what does that mean? Like, does it mean expanding the Brookline Mental Health Center? Does it mean, like, in other words, we will be able to tailor this to Brookline. But if we get lost in all this stuff about, you know, bidding out and all these other things, that's a really dangerous thing. Because in doing all that, then the next thing we know, we haven't actually had the consultation yet. So I understand that if we were to make some decisions and to bring in vendors to do, we may have to then, you know, go to some type of bidding and things like that, and understanding all the nuance of that. But we don't even know what we want for people to bid on yet. And to me, this is the things that, particularly in New England town governments, slow down progress. That it will go through 13 iterations of just who we can talk to in a formal way. And so I am worried about that. Like, I am worried that, like, you know, we can't even arrange to help develop a plan. And so that, again, I feel like, particularly in small and in New England town governments, these are the things that really slow things down, which holds institutional status quo. And that is very dangerous to me.
Thanks, Malcolm. Folks, I'm just resharing the link. This is for attendees, really, that that Devin shared earlier in the meeting, which gives access to the document we're talking about right now. If you click on that link and then click on the item, it's very cool. You click on the item in the agenda. On the right side, you'll see pop up links to the documents that are connected to that agenda item. You click on that, you got the document, you're in. So you see everything we can. I want to keep, I know there's a request to screen share, but I want to keep us talking to each other and not have a big document up instead of us talking to each other. So you can all find it there. Mike.
Yeah, so I want to assure Malcolm that and everybody else that having a request for a proposal out does not mess things up, delay the process, turn it into an endless cycle of who can we talk to. When you build the request for a proposal, you put in the qualifications of the organization that would win the bid. And you say, and you put in, you look at what the Cahoots program has done, you look at the characteristics of what that program provides. It does appear to be unique. You also put in that the organization has to have experience consulting with other municipalities, which they've done. You construct your bid in a way that makes it really very difficult for anybody else to come in with an equivalent proposal.
All right, I don't want to get too much on the weeds on this, but I see a couple hands, so let's go ahead and get Ann and then Alexander.
Alexander, are you going to respond directly to Mike, or go ahead and then I'll go?
Again, I don't want this to become a procurement law discussion, because, you know, better heads than ours are going to sort this out offline. But I just, based on my experience with procurement law at the Attorney General's office, which was in design and construction, that might get us into some trouble. That approach.
You obviously have to follow the rules, but it's not an Mel is really the expert in this sort of thing, or for that matter, Dave Janakakis in the procurement office. He builds these proposals all the time, these RFPs all the time. it's possible to create an RFP such that you get back the proposals that you're looking for.
The design and construction is a whole different law and whole different process. This is Chapter 30B. We deal with it all the time. We have to do it for every goods and service that we do. So, I don't think it's going to be an impediment. I think the issue is, what is the scope of work? How much are we going to ask Cahoots to consult with the town on the issues, that the select board adopt as part of this? Is it going to be limited to, the crisis intervention stuff? Is it going to, talk about Brookline Forward and the whole human service, social services? That's really the question. And but I really, as I said again, I wouldn't fret too much about the details of procurement.
Thank you. Anne?
I'll be brief, but I think that there's also going to be considerable debate when moving forward on this with the Police Reform Committee on perspectives around what we're recommending vis-a-vis what the Reform Committee is recommending in terms of support for vulnerable people in crisis. I heard Elizabeth Childs mention that she was concerned that Cahoots didn't have licensed mental health professionals as part of the team. And from my perspective, and I believe our subcommittee's perspective, that was one of the elements of the Cahoots program that we thought was a good thing, that we were taking away the kind of medical model kind of perspective on what people in crisis may need in terms of supports, and putting it more in the hands of people who've been trained in de-escalation and peer support and other types of models, but that it was a good thing not to have that professional clinical gaze as part of the supports team. And what I was hearing from the Reforms Committee is that something they want in place. There was also a concern about, in comparing it to the BEST model, that the BEST team brings people to EDs for evaluations. And again, the whole purpose of the Cahoots model and why we were proposing it is to avoid as much as needed sending people to EDs for medical model types of clinical gaze. So I'm concerned about just moving forward in terms of recommendations around if we're doing RFPs or consultations from other organizations, just what exactly it is that we're asking to be considered in terms of our supports and services to people in this town. And I just wanted to kind of put that out there. I know it's an ongoing conversation, but I think our approaches are very, very different on the.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. What I'll say is, and I'll make this clear in our meetings, that, and tell me the moment you think I'm wrong about what it is I'm about to say, is that the element of Cahoots that for us, I think, is most attractive is the non-police response option for particularly issues related to mental health, but not exclusively either. The ability to either call a specific number that will not get you a police officer, but will get you the help that you need for yourself or another person who may be in crisis, or for dispatchers to be able to work with people to make sure that the appropriate personnel are showing up on scene to whatever it is that's happening, and that a non-police response is an option for them too. And so I think I think to me, that's very different than the approach that says, well, we're still putting police forward on everything, but we want to make sure we have more pre-crisis services and more, and all that's very important. But I think what am I getting wrong about that, Ann?
I think that absolutely the non-police first responder approach is what we're looking at, but I think it is more than that. I think it's also who we're sending, what their approach is to working with people in crisis.
Okay.
And I think there's a real strong difference in perspective between the police reform subcommittee and the task force subcommittee on what that means and I think there really is a big difference between suggesting a team of professionals to help people in crisis get more enmeshed in the medical model system versus a team of people who may have their own lived experience, may not, but are trained in kind of a community service and supports model of meeting people where they're at and not recommending next steps, but working with that person to hear what their needs are and then to help them access the supports and services that they need. If a person wants to go to the hospital, then they would help them get to the hospital, but it may not be what's needed in every situation. Clinical people tend, I'm generalizing, but I think it's true, tend to send people to the hospital oftentimes when that's not what's needed for the person who's going through the crisis.
Got it. Okay. On it. So for us, it's important that whatever language, comes before the select board includes specifically the CAHOOTS model, not a recommendation to consult with someone to review our approach to, mental health or some other issue, but that specifically that this model is what we've recommended. This program is the one that we recommended to consult with, and that should be the recommendation. Fair enough?
Yeah.
I know, and I know there's a lot more to it, and there's a ton of nuance in here.
Yeah.
I'll do the best I can in our board meetings, but I hope you'll be there too in case we need to promote you and have you provide to do a better job than I can about providing that nuance.
Yep, I'll be there.
My best. Thanks. Okay, so there were two more things, and we're at 9:29, and so I want to make sure we can get through both of them. One was the vote to expand civilian social service resources to take the burden off BPD where appropriate and safe. They have an organizational chart which isn't, I don't think, in our packet unless it's somewhere else that I missed. Devin, do you have that, or is it in our packet and I missed it?
I'm just looking for it now. I don't know if it was in their packet on Wednesday. If that's how sort of.
Yeah, I don't think it was either. I think Bernard just screen shared it. And so I do have, I did my own screenshot of it to share, but honestly, frankly, I don't know that even doing that is going to be particularly helpful at this point, because I think what I will say is that the key differentiators between where we are and where they are is we're proposing a separate agency. I think one of the best benefits of that is to actually have those folks work in the same office so that they're being collaborative and working together and I think addressing more holistically the social service needs that folks have. There's some of that in the most recent proposal out of the that I think it's Bernard sharing this with the reform committee. So I don't know that they've fully weighed in on this exact proposal, but maybe that was what they voted on Wednesday. But in any case, it contemplates new sub-programs in the Department of Health and Human Services focused on youth and family services, immigrant and refugee services, LGBTQ services, and community crisis services. It is not specific at all about the FTEs, the full-time equivalents, the number of positions that would be that where it is specific elsewhere about how many full-time positions it's contemplating in some other recommendations. So essentially what they're thinking is building out what we're talking about, but within Health and Human Services, but the number of positions aren't specified unless they are stipulating, and it wasn't clear to me, to the number of positions that we put in the Brookline Forward document. So that's going to require a lot of conversation, I think, with the select board. As I've said before, we proposed a way to pay for the proposals that we had. It's not altogether clear to me, in lieu of monies coming from the police department to cover this cost, exactly where those funds are going to come from, to pay for not just what we're proposing, but a number of positions that the reform committee is proposing. So that all needs to get worked out some way, somehow. I am going to, in conversations with the board, hold fast to the idea that I think it's important to have a cabinet level person focused on social services specifically. This is adding, as contemplated in the reform committee document, adding a lot more to the plate of our health director, who I don't know. I mean, he's terrific, but whether or not he has the bandwidth to also absorb a whole new department essentially within his own department is unclear to me, and what that might look like. I don't know. And so I want to hold fast on our proposal here. I think it's well constructed and makes sense, and having somebody at the cabinet level focused on social services is going to be really meaningful, even in addition to the more direct services, the ability to really start to understand, to more deeply understand inequities in our town and start to address them at the root cause and the root level. And so I don't necessarily see anything in here that I think improves upon what it is that we've created, although, they're independent of what we're proposing. Maybe there's some other good things that are in here as well, but I know you all haven't had an opportunity to see this, and I don't even know that it's been is that, Devin, is your understanding that chart that we saw was essentially I don't know, agreed upon by the committee on Wednesday's meeting? Maybe it was.
I think that it's they did say, it was a vague vote, which I think will be further discussed on Monday and then again on Wednesday. I did find it and I have put it in your packet, and I updated the link. So if you click on that and then click on the agenda item that we're on right now, you'll see the reforms org chart there for folks who want to take a look at it.
Perfect. Thank you for that. It's much better than the photo that I took while I was watching the meeting. That's great. And members of the public can see that as well, just FYI. Thanks, Devin. So I don't know that there's much to talk about here at this point, but if you have anything you'd like to say, open hearing it. Chi-Chi.
Yeah, just this is an aside to the conversation about differences between Brookline Forward and what the Reform Committee has, just to let folks know that wearing my Brookline Asian American Family Network hat, we've also put forth a list of asks to the select board after the Atlanta shootings. And the first item is an ask for more services support for the Asian American community, either as part of Brookline Forward or whatever structure, including a social worker who can provide culturally appropriate services and be bilingual in one of the dominant Asian languages in town. And then relating it back to Cahoots, one of the things in terms of the consultations we definitely want to see, I don't know if Eugene, Oregon has the same demographics or population of limited English proficient residents, but to be mindful of that as well.
Also, just along those lines, the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, Community Relations is launching, I think they either had or are soon having their first meeting of an immigrant advancement group. The chair of that group has worked in sort of immigrant rights for a very long time, and all of the other members of it are all immigrants as well. And so that's an area that I think is going to help uncover some more of the needs of the various immigrant communities in Brookline, and identify action items for us. I think this is great. I imagine a sort of Brookline Forward that is a multilingual office, that and multicultural office that can best meet the needs of all the different populations in Brookline. This is one of those areas, access, that I think we can improve on greatly, language access, but also just greater access to our government understanding, because it's weird, y'all. This is, even if you come from somewhere, you don't have to come from another country to think this government is weird. You can just come from another city in Massachusetts and be like, how do you run this stuff again? It requires some explaining. I mean, the advisory committee alone, as Chi-Chi knows, like, it requires some explaining. And so it's not super intuitive to people how to tap into their government and, petition their government for changes and those kinds of things. And I think probably even more so for immigrant communities within Brookline. So we've got some work to do there for sure. Yeah. Thanks, Chi-Chi. All right. The other piece, if you have any thoughts about any of this, let me know. The other piece, that fourth piece, was essentially an additional data analysis resources in the police department. And so my preference certainly would be the repurposing of a current position. I'm not interested in adding, except where necessary, costs to the police department. And so we've got a number of, including open positions right now, that we could sort of rewrite the description for and include and hire someone with the ability to do to improve our data collection and analysis. And there also might be the need, I think there is the need, to improve some of the systems that we have so that we can have more robust data collection, analysis, and transparency. And so that also was something that was part of our report. So I think this is an area where we agree. I'm just always mindful about us making an agreement and then all of a sudden it ends up adding $500,000 to the budget or something like that. That's not something that I do support. Although I agree that the department needs to be better at this data piece. Any other thoughts on that? Okay. Good. And then you see the other recommendations, not ones that I think there may be things in here that we might agree on, but not things that we've talked about, not things I've sort of really gotten into with Bernard or anybody else in the reform committee. Some things that we're diametrically opposed on. And so, but you can see the other recommendations in there. These are not things they voted. Devin, correct me if I'm wrong. These are not things they voted on yet, though, right?
Correct.
Right. Okay. So these are votes that they may take up either on some part of it on Monday or other parts on Wednesday. I'm not sure, but at least you get to take a preview at some of the things that they're considering. All right. Anything else we haven't talked about that we need to address? Anne, sorry, I see your hand.
I'm just wondering, they seem to be voting a lot on our recommendations. Are we voting on theirs?
No, I don't.
I'm just
asking. No, I don't see it that way necessarily. I think what they're attempting to do is exactly what we were talking about at our last meeting, saying like, hey, we're happy to sort of work with y'all on improving some of your recommendations, but the door swings both ways, and we've got some serious recommendations that we want to be considered. And if the committee policing reforms wants to get involved in that, then that'd be great. I think that's what's happening. I think ultimately also we, like Bernard and I, have a responsibility to try to put something in front of the board, if we just say, hey, what do you think about the process by which people make complaints, we're going to have a 2-hour conversation and not get anywhere. I think we have to put something in front of the board and make clear to them areas where we're in maybe full agreement, some agreement, no agreement, and then have it all shake out at the board level. It's just, there's just no other like workable way to do it, especially because there's so much here. I mean, again, this is going to go on for a while, I think, with these votes and taking up different parts of this. So we're trying to make some movement on areas where we're not too far apart. Not everybody's going to get exactly what they want, right? There's some disagreement about whether or not, for instance, a police union representative should be on the one of those non-voting members of the PCAC, and I said that's just an area where I'm not willing to move. I just will not vote for that in any way, shape, or form. And I'm glad to see that we were able to sort of not have them as a liaison or a non-voting member of that body. So I think we've made some changes, and it's not going to make everybody happy, but we've got to try to reach some kind of common ground here.
I agree on common ground. It just felt weird that they were voting on all of our recommendations.
Right.
Me, that's all.
If we have, it's tough. We're not in a position right now to really discuss everything from items 2 and 3 because they haven't voted on them. So we don't even know that they're actually going to end up recommending those things. So after their meetings, in our meeting next week, then we'll have more to talk about after they've had some votes, and they know how to reach us if they want our feedback. Alexander?
So in terms of the cahoots piece, I'm curious about, is there a meaningful distinction between the vote that they just had and voting to adopt or approve our cahoots recommendation, like the recommendations of the Vulnerable People Subcommittee? Because if there is, I think that's something I'd like to hash out, because I don't think there is. I think that they were substantially arguing for the same thing that we were, possibly not knowingly. And I think that if they are fully in support of the cahoots recommendation, getting that language clear before it goes to the full select board would be good.
Yeah, I think it's, there are going to be differences of opinion on that body as there are on this body too. There was sort of a comment earlier about from one of the members about most of the folks agreeing about cahoots, and there being only some skepticism. So I think the key is making clear. And that's fine. Like that, not everything needs to be 100. Everyone's 100% on board with everything or unanimous. Or I think the thing we need to make clear to the board is that our agreement with, if there is one with item 1B from those votes that took place, is that we consult with cahoots, not that we, that we do all the. I do think it's important to do all the other things, to like really do a more thorough analysis of the mental health resources and other resources that are available to residents in our town and others who are visiting. I think that's all important to do, but that specifically consulting with cahoots is what we proposed, and that's what needs to be, that's what we want to vote on from the select board, not something that might include cahoots. And I think that there were some people lobbying for that, but I don't know that that's what was voted. Actually, I'm still not 100% clear what was voted last night, and maybe some members who voted for or Wednesday night might not be 100% clear, but that's what I know we're going to want the board to vote on. So I'll make that clear. Mike?
Yeah, listening to this discussion, I think there's something that is important to say, which is that when we started this process, I don't think that anybody would have thought that it would have gotten as far as it has in terms of, for example, recognizing that there's a good reason to engage the cahoots program in a consulting project to look at what we might do here along the lines of what Alexander described. And in terms of a civilian review board, I don't know that that we would have envisioned something even as specific and as far along as we've got. There were three, seems to me there were three main thrusts of what the task force was suggesting. One was to institute something like Cahoots in Brookline. And the first step of that is to say, well, okay, what would that look like? And that's in process. And another was a civilian review panel. And we're now arguing about the details of that, but we're not arguing about whether or not to have a panel. And the third one, which unfortunately hasn't seemed to have gotten any traction because it would require state legislation, is a change in traffic enforcement, the way traffic enforcement is done. But those first two, there's been a fair amount accomplished here, and it's not just here, but it's been picked up and taken forward. And I hope that everybody recognizes the mutual success that that this group has had.
Yeah. Also add too that that after these whatever recommendations are adopted can also be improved upon later, right? And so there's going to come a time where you know that I'm generally pretty clear about where my lines are in the sand are, right? Like where I just can't support that, you know. And I was, you know, in my conversations with Bernard in particular, I've been very honest about that and open about that. Like, hey, I think we can work together here. I don't like everything in there, but I think we can find some way to, you know, reach some place where we're both equally happy and unhappy or something like that. But there's some areas where I just can't move on that. That's just a no-go. You know, I do think that the IAO, like I would be, you know, I'd be happy to vote for some improved version of the PCAC. We talked about some improvements we'd like to make, but it's got to come with a commitment from the select board to address the IAO, the internal affairs officer, the office of professional responsibility, and to remove that, to work to remove that through the negotiations with the police union. I think that for me is the line. It's the whole ball game, honestly. And so everything else is nice. It's better, but it doesn't actually solve the issue around complaints at all. And so that for me is the area where I've got to say, like, we have to commit as a board to include that in our bargaining. There is literally one position that we're talking about changing within the police department. OPR is the investigator is one person in the department. So we're not talking about wholesale changes to you know, numerous staff within the department. We're literally talking about this one position. I think that's doable. And it may require some negotiation to do it, but I think it's doable. And so that's something. But I agree with Mike in general, is that there's some areas here where I think, you know, some of the things that we came in, you know, caring deeply about are, you know, there's some possibility for getting maybe not exactly what it is that we've proposed. Which is usually the case, by the way, with these things. You don't get exactly what you propose, but something that makes measurable progress. I think the other piece that Mike didn't mention is the Brookline Forward piece, and I still think there's some possibility there. We see a reform committee that is voting to say, sure, we can, you know, we'll vote to, you know, in some way support adding what the task force was talking about, albeit under Health and Human Services. And albeit sort of not at all specific about whether or not that's one person doing all that work or 3 or 5 people doing all that work, but we're moving in the right direction, right? The idea that there's an understanding that there aren't enough social service supports and in Brookline being a common understanding. Now, how we go about you know, making sure that that's not the future of Brookline, that as we move forward, we have a different state of affairs, that still needs to get worked out, and we're going to have to do some work on that over the next couple of weeks. And you know, right now, I don't think that the organizational chart that's been presented is agreed upon. That's not something where I think in terms of the chart itself and the arrangement there, I think the agreement we have is that there need to be more social services. That's a good place to start, but that's not substantial agreement on exactly what that looks like, and it's not even close. So so we need to continue to do more work there, because otherwise, I think what we're going to end up putting before the board is the chart that you all just saw and our proposal from the task force report, and then ask the board to somehow try to reconcile that in our meetings, and that doesn't usually go very well when we do things like that. And so I think we got to try to get a little bit closer together, and so we can give the board a few choices, but not what now seems like almost an infinite number of choices about how you'd like to do this. And so we got some more work to do. Yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah. I'll also say there was a comment on by Michael Keaveney, the president of the police union, at Wednesday night's meeting, where he said that whatever the town decides to do, that I don't remember the exact words, but essentially that they want to be an honest broker in all this, and that they want to move forward. I think that was a good statement to make. Obviously, the proof's always in the pudding, right? And we'll see what that looks like going forward. But I think that what are at least for the moment good signs is that the folks from the Reform Committee are willing to move a little bit. We've been willing to move a little bit, and if the union is serious about being partners, even in I don't know about supporting, but willing to work with policies that might, somehow either, whether it be limiting positions or shifting funding away from the department and things like that. I know it's not something they would be happy about, but if they're willing to commit after this process, I don't know if it's ever going to be completed, but this process sort of reaches this new phase where we've made some decisions and they're willing to be part of the work in sort of rebuilding trust with the community, and being willing to continue to adapt to what community members want today in their police department and their model of public safety, then they'll I'll certainly be willing and open to continue to talk with them and work with them on that. So I think at least rhetoric wise, between all the folks that are involved in bringing these proposals to the board, I think we're in a relatively good place right now. I think it does come down to what the board decides to do. And I think that as much as anything is going to I don't know, as much as anything is going to determine what the next steps are going to be, what, where everybody goes from here. And particularly all those folks that remember that created the space for us to do this work in the first place. I'll continue to remind the board the overwhelming support that we've gotten from the public, and that is in public hearings, and that is through emails, has been in support, and very full-throated, vociferous support of the task force to reimagine policing in Brookline and our recommendations. There's just no other way around that. And so, so as we go into now, what's going to be our April 3rd conversation and potential votes on those issues, I want to make sure that we continue to remind people about that. There's really strong support for what we're bringing to the table, and I think that needs to be recognized in the votes that the select board takes on April 3rd. Chi-Chi.
So I was at that select board meeting for a different reason, and I had heard the comments of the police union president, and I was really struck. It was a very different tone than the few times I've seen them before, a much more openness. I don't know if it's the result of all these hearings. I'm certainly the result of, I think, our work, and most in particular you, Raul. I mean, this sort of groundswell of grassroots desire for change wouldn't really have moved the ball as much as it have without your leadership. It needed someone to catalyze it, and you've been that person, and I want to thank you for that. This is actually really a lot of progress when you look at things. I mean, I think Malcolm, you talked earlier about, seeing how long things take with this New England style of government. This is actually fairly fast. I do federal advocacy, and there are issues that, people spend decades on, and make this much movement. So this is very encouraging. And I think everybody here, frankly, I'm not a big proponent of patting yourself on the back, but I think we should pat ourselves a little on the back, and we should give a big shout out to Raul.
Thanks, Cheech. I appreciate that. Anne?
Everything Chi just said. And one more procedural kind of question that I just wonder if anybody's considered. If the vote is now potentially April 3rd, has there been any conversation about tabling the vote until after the town elections, which was only 4 weeks after that?
There has not been conversation about that yet. If that's something that maybe that's something in our next meeting. So folks, if you could hang in there just a little bit longer, I should have mentioned this earlier. I would love it if we could meet next Friday, and then the following Friday would be after the April 3rd meeting. I think we'd have a lot to talk about then. If you can just hang in there a little bit longer, and we can continue to, because I think it's really important for this body to, as a body, and you as individuals, to provide feedback to to what's coming out of the reform committee, which is ongoing, and also to select board conversations and votes as well. Eitan?
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure. I actually think it's very, very important that we have votes before the election.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't address that part. Yeah, I think there are things that we can vote on now. I think there's progress that can be made now. Maybe there's more progress to be made after May 4th. That's certainly possible, but I don't know what the board looks like after May 4th, and how well read the various candidates are going to be on our proposals and all those kinds of things. But I think if there's progress to be made now, and things areas where we're in substantial, if not full agreement, then we should move forward on those things, I think, too. Yeah. Alexander?
I'd love to get clear at least a little bit on how many more meetings of the task force we should expect to have.
Yeah, Alexander's like, you got things to do. You got things to do.
I got to start studying for the bar exam on May 17th. So
yeah. Oh, Bonnie, thanks for, yeah, no, yeah, we got to get you out of here. All right, let me just take a quick look at the calendar. And sorry about, I can't. Apparently, I've been saying the wrong date. I've been saying April 3rd, and what I meant to say was April 6th. Sorry about that. So April 6th is going to be that meeting where we're going to take those votes. I would say.
Oh, sorry, Raul.
No, go ahead.
I would just also like to say that realistically, this will be multiple meetings with multiple votes. This was something I also gave a heads up to the Reforms Committee on Wednesday, but if the anticipation is that on the 6th, they will take all the votes on all the things, that is not what will happen. I think a good example of this is the BFAC report that came out last year. There were 6 to 8 meetings where they went over about 75% of just the recommendations, and then only took a handful of votes and did not, with the scope and scale of these reports, which are so large, I think the common ground makes a huge difference. That's going to definitely be able to put some tangible votes on the table in, like, I would say 2 to 3 weeks of meetings. But just so everyone's expectations are, I like to under promise and over deliver. Some votes will be taken then, but it will likely be a multi-week process, and we'll try and get more clarity on that during the future agenda planning meetings as well for you all.
Let me think about this. If you had to ask me now, what I would love is for this body to continue to meet through April. Not the subcommittee work or anything like that, but just to have these Friday morning meetings through the end of April, with the possibility that some of those dates we don't actually meet if there's not actually work to do or proposals to consider. And I know that's asking for a lot, and I know town meeting's coming up. I see Mike's hand. But I think what we need is your advice and your perspective on this. And I'm trying to figure out as these conversations are ongoing and these votes can, will be rolling out. I hope we have substantial votes on the 6th, by the way, too. I think there's some things we could vote on the 6th, but I understand that it may take some time to address other issues. I'm just trying to figure out how else we get the buy-in from this body on any changes or proposals that are coming forward. Mike? And I know we're at 10:01, by the way. I'm going to try to see if we can.
Yeah, I'll make it very brief. Speaking of that, I wonder whether on the principle that work expands to fill the time available, we might have shorter meetings. And remind you that the advisory committee meeting is meeting every Tuesday and Thursday night, and some of those Thursday night meetings run pretty late, like we did last night.
Yeah, got to send you both some coffee, you and Chi-Chi. Send you some.
No, caffeine, IV, caffeine, just right into
Gotta hook you up. Fair enough. Let me, we'll take a look. Devin and I'll take a look at what we have for one. And I promise you, we're not going to get together in this. We can do so. We can all hang out if you want, but I'm not going to have you all meet just to meet with nothing to actually discuss or anything like that. I won't do that. We just won't meet that week as we've done. We did 1 week earlier this month. So just know that. Cool. All right, y'all, we're at 10:02. I want to thank you for your time. I think this is really helpful. We also have, the board's not going to take any of this up as a reminder next week. So we also have our meeting on next Friday, which I want to keep because I think there is going to be movement on from the reform committee that we're going to want to respond to before the board meeting, before the select board meeting. So we'll keep that meeting next Friday. We may need the full time next Friday to discuss. So let's plan on doing that at least for that week. And we'll see you then. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for everybody for watching too. Take care. Bye.